So thanks to everyone for coming out. I know that we're probably one of the only events in the city that is not giving out free drinks right now, so we're even more appreciative. But a special thanks to our panelists. First off, Vanessa Carlos, who is the director of Carlos Ishikawa in London and also the founder of Condo. And then Stefania Bortolami, who is the founder of Bortolami Gallery in New York and also more recently the founder of Artist City, which is an initiative that we'll talk about in more depth very quickly. So I guess let's just get right into it, so we don't have much time. Stefania, I'll start with you. Could you kind of talk about Artist City and how it came about in response to some of the challenges that you see out there as a mid-market gallery?
Yes. Okay, so there's a lot of talk around about the challenges of the mid-sized gallery and the plight, and there's many kind of negative words thrown about the galleries like ours. And frankly, I didn't start Artist City because I found that there was a plight. I found Artist City because I wanted to add something, to additionally to what a mid-sized gallery is. So adding an experimental side of our day-to-day life, because galleries, whether small, mid-size, or big, we are doing 5 weeks shows usually, maybe 6 weeks, and then we do our fairs, and it becomes a little bit of a routine. You sometimes add an artist, it's exciting, but in the end, you always do a show, you always go to the fairs, you usually bring some works of some artists. It becomes a little bit not boring by any means, but restrictive. So I wanted to do something that slows it down a little bit, that gives an artist the possibility of playing with a space for a year. And the way to, of course, be able to afford doing that was to go to places where the real estate prices are not as high as in New York or London or Paris. In America, there's a lot of not expensive real estate. I mean, real estate is very expensive in San Francisco, New York, and basically everywhere else it's kind of affordable comparatively. So we came up with this idea and talked to our artists, and they were all very interested. In fact, we're going to start working also with artists that we do not represent, because every artist is interested in confronting another place and confronting a durational show that you can change, you can play with it, you can add, or you can totally make it show a different part of your work. For the moment, we're doing it in the United States because it's easy. We don't have to cross borders, start an LLC somewhere else, and make it complicated tax-wise. The United States are like my native country, different states, and every capital of every state has usually 2 or 3 art museums. And these art museums have got boards and members, and there is an audience in every seat in the United States. There is an audience for art. So we thought, well, why don't we bring something to Atlanta or St. Louis, or where there's a limited amount of things going on. And yeah, basically that was the reasoning. Then a lot of people started telling me, oh, this is how you fight back against the mega gallery. I'm thinking, well, I don't know. This is not what I thought. That was not the impulsive strategies to fight back, but it has given me a different platform that I'm very happy with.
So, Vanessa, how does that kind of dovetail with some of your reasons for starting Condo, if it does at all?
It crosses over in some ways. Like, Condo was born out of a frustration with the art, well, with the world at large. I think that the art world is a microcosm of it, and I was very frustrated at this kind of neoliberal pyramid where everything points at corporations, and I thought, in the kind of bigger world, the way that independents get by is by conglomerating or acting collectively. And Condo is a project where galleries from a certain city host international galleries. So they either collaborate on a show together or they split up their space and divide it. And it became a way of international galleries being able to show abroad in a way where, because resources are shared and you're working through these networks, I hope it leaves more room for experimentation because you don't have so many of these kind of paralyzing costs that are normally involved with showing your artist in another city. So we started in London in 2016, and we've done it yearly in London, and last year we did it in New York, and this upcoming year we're going to do it in Shanghai and Mexico City as well. But it wasn't, again, not as much a response to the market, but it was a proposal for a different way of working sometimes, which is a slower way of looking, a different type of conversation to have with your colleagues, a different type of conversation to have with your artists, a different kind of setup for putting together an exhibition internationally.
I think that's, both of you are sort of speaking to something that I wanted to talk more about, which is this idea that you're sort of both saying that you are interested in slowing people down, kind of giving them a more deliberate experience with art and bringing experimentation back into it. And obviously there's a lot of conversation out there about how sort of the world as a whole is just speeding up and getting less attentive. Do you feel like maybe other mid-market gallerists are underestimating the kind of effect that they can have on the state of things, or what do you think?
I mean, I don't know what they underestimate. I don't know what they estimated. I think it's something that one gallery started, this idea of a multinational venue, and was very successful, and has been a path towards a very professional art gallery world. And I think it's fantastic. I mean, these galleries, they in New York, as probably, as in London too, they do shows that are museum quality. And they're free for everyone to get in. They really have a great service. They bring a lot of attention to the art world, and they breed a lot of new collectors. So they really helped amplify what the art world is, the resonance of the art world. Along with the old affairs, this all helped amplify the art world. The thing that maybe, the only problem that I see is that everything has got limits. So even these big galleries, they work so much better with a certain typology of artists that are very, they're mature as artists, that can sustain big spaces and that do not mind dealing with what is essentially a corporation rather than a gallery. For some other artists that are maybe younger and less, they still need a real dialogue, or they still need a sort of different type of hand-holding, then these galleries are not really working. So that's why when people say the plight of the medium-sized gallery, I don't, yes, but at the same time, they cannot just disappear, the medium-sized gallery, because to go from a small gallery to a big gallery, you need the other step. You need a small gallery, medium gallery, and then big gallery. It's a natural way of climbing.
It's a natural
the steps.
progression
Yeah.
of things, right? Vanessa, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, for me, it's more to do. Of course, there are huge galleries, and as Stefania said, that has its place. But for me, it's more to do with these structures. And I often think about how my generation of gallerists, like, we're being handed over a model, like an inheritance that I'm not sure I want. Like, that's not what I would like to, my idea of success wouldn't necessarily look like that. And I think you have examples of galleries that have been open for 20 or so years who are like enormously successful but haven't adhered to this kind of structure. Like in London, we have Sadie Coles. And so for me, I don't see this problem of the also mid-market galleries. Like I'm not even sure like what the distinctions are, but I see more of the reasons why I got into art and working with artists. Of course, like we all have to make a living, but they're about a kind of discourse that satisfies me, and I would like to strive for that. And I think that the structures that are currently in place kind of lead to this other path, which is not something that personally interests me. So I think for mid-sized galleries who would like to hold on to that, it's more about like finding ways of operating that are sustainable and that don't compromise that commitment to being excited by what you're doing every day.
Well, part of that, I think, a big part of the debate around this tier in the gallery system is just the increasing demands of maintaining a physical space, let alone multiple physical spaces if you want to really try to expand. And so there have been a lot of people talking about the idea of just trying to divorce themselves from a permanent physical space entirely. But both of you in these alternative projects that you've come up with, you have still maintained a brick and mortar space. Obviously it's a deliberate decision, but can you talk a little bit about sort of your belief in the continuance of the traditional gallery, even as you're trying to do these other kind of more creative, more flexible things?
Yeah, for me, it's, the type of artists that I work with, most of them end up making maybe 60% of the work in the studio, and 40% really happens in the space. Like the space becomes this final step in resolving an idea or experimenting or trying out a process. And I think that unless you have a very straightforward kind of showroom program, that's always going to be necessary. So I don't see how spaces will ever be replaced by when people say, are we all going to just have Instagram galleries? Like some of us might, but certainly a lot of artists I know it couldn't work that way. The space is incredibly important to resolve their ideas, and also, that physical experience of art is so valuable that I don't know why we would want to remove that from the kind of package.
Yeah, I basically agree with Vanessa. We don't want art becoming just product that can be shipped by Amazon and bought on eBay or whatever. There will be that. There is that a little bit, but most of it is art that is created for a show. I mean, for an artist, doing a show is an important thing. That's how you bare your soul, and all your friends come, and the critics come, and this is where you show what you've been up to for the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years in the studio, and that's and you have to have a show in a space, in a physical space, brick and mortar.
Right, and I mean, correct me if you feel differently, but it also seems like that's an important thing for collectors as well, to sort of feel like there is actually sort of a space that they can go to and a sense of community that they can have, where they know that there are going to be openings, they're going to see other people that they can converse with, that they can interact with. I don't necessarily think that collectors want to just buy things off of Amazon art either. And it seems like the results that, from what I can tell, back that statement up. But can you talk maybe a little bit about sort of how you feel about that social angle, I guess, and whether that's really, because Vanessa, you were talking before about kind of community and how important that is to the ethos of Condo.
Yeah, I mean, I think, even being here in Miami is like a great example of that. I think that to have a place that you can receive people and there's always something that you can show them when they're coming through town is, of course, really important. But, even traditionally, like just this idea of being able to congregate somewhere and have a conversation and look at things together and discuss them together, that's completely like hand in hand with the experience of making art and looking at art for me. So I certainly don't think that that's ever in danger of being lost.
Stefania, how has that played out in terms of Artist City? Because obviously those initiatives are all about kind of, well, I don't want to say all about, but there's, it seems to me a big part of it is about accessing a new audience and kind of bringing new people into the tent, so to speak. So how has your experience been in that sense when you go to cities like St. Louis and put on these shows that last for a year?
Well, we're learning because we did not know what we were doing. You know, for example, the first one was with Daniel Buren here in Miami, and that was easy because there's already a community, a big art community here in Miami. The second one was Eric Wesley. He took over a old Taco Bell in outside of East St. Louis, which I did not know, but I think it still is the murder capital of America. So it was very difficult to convince people from St. Louis proper to cross the Mississippi River and come to the Taco Bell. We had to hire buses and
Taco Bell was not a big draw. You're saying that wasn't enough on its own.
No, we managed, but we had to do events and things because that's the thing. You know, I did not realize, and Eric knew it, but he didn't mind. Did not realize that it was such a controversial area. Also very close to Ferguson. All the riots had already just happened there, which made it all more interesting. But in order to involve the local community, we, had to jump through hoops a little bit. But I think that's also part of what makes it interesting. To have to confront new realities. New York, London, we know it. We know more or less who's going to come to the openings. We know who we want to come to the openings. And so this is, every time we have to discover something, a totally new reality. And I think I know that we have some people from St. Louis that started coming to the gallery after that, and some younger artists from St. Louis were very happy that this was happening. Eric was organizing little talks and events in his Taco Bell throughout the year. There was some action that they were happy to get.
Well, let's expand on this a little bit in the sense of, we're now talking a lot about how artists fit into these structures, and there's a lot of conversation out there about kind of how gallerists maybe need to change to adapt to the current circumstances out there. I'm wondering if you feel as though it's also incumbent on artists, especially the artists that you work with, to kind of maybe rethink some of the ways that they proceed. Or maybe I'm being too critical here. I don't know. I would be curious to hear about it from the other side, because it seems like so much of the debate is focused on what people on the sell side can do to kind of adjust to the changes in the economy and whatever else.
Yeah, something that I think we don't talk about that much when we talk about problems of sustainability with kind of younger or mid-sized galleries is that the responsibility really for me is with collectors, is with artists, it's not just with galleries. And I think that certainly this comes back to what I was saying about these models and these structures that we're all kind of reenacting, where I think artists also have a responsibility to support certain galleries if they believe in an experimental program, or if they believe in discourse and that matters to them, then they really have to show that by it. And same with collectors. And very recently I met this artist who's just graduated. He had a number of bigger galleries sort of fighting over him, and he's made two of them work together alongside a younger gallery. And when he told me this, it kind of blew my mind, because it's so rare for a young artist, especially one fresh out of art school, to kind of say these are the terms under which I will work, and not just accept these other models. And I think that artists do have a responsibility for supporting that. And if they're going to complain about the commercial pressures, then they should also be looking at the other side of that, and what part are they playing in making sure that galleries that don't abide by that way of doing things are able to sustain themselves, and obviously collectors also.
Stefania, kind of building off of that, do you find, because you just said earlier that you're now beginning to work with artists in Artist City that you don't even represent. So why did you decide to make that move? And when you're selecting artists or at least proposing artists for these sites, like, what is it about their practice that you're looking at that you think would make them especially well suited for one of these types of projects as opposed to something else?
Well, you're asking me a question like if Artist City was something that has a rule book or some regulations of any type. It's really every project that came out from serendipity, and I've been around for a while. I have a lot of artist friends, so talking about my artist friends, they go like, "Oh, I want to do one." I'm like, "Okay," and that's that. So basically, that's how it happened. It was not. Let me think. And so one, for example, is Paul Pfeiffer. I know Paul forever, and although he works with Paula Cooper, they don't have any problems, for him to do something with me in Atlanta. Another one is Cecily Brown, who was one of my closest friends, and we're going to do something in South Carolina. And she now also works with Paula Cooper, but I don't particularly target Paula Cooper artists. It was just a coincidence. And because the commercial side of these projects is very limited, I don't ask artists, you have to give me something for sale, but usually artists they don't see me as the rich, big, mega corporate gallery, so they know that if there is something for sale, so their cost can be repaid, that would be great. So there's that, but nobody's becoming rich, monetarily rich. We're all becoming spiritually richer, but so it works in that sense, and other galleries do not have a problem with it. We're also not going to places like Los Angeles or San Francisco where there's a lot of other galleries. It's mainly places where these artists, unless they're doing a museum show, they will not show.
Well, another thing I wanted to talk about was just the sense that I think to the extent that the marketplace, the industry, however you want to define it, is aware of these types of alternative projects, whether it's Condo or Artist City or other examples, it seems like most of the ones that are getting attention are still all kind of conceived and run by gallerists as opposed to artists or other kind of figures within the industry. Do you think that that's partially a result of the fact that, I don't want to say the fact that, but is it partially because you feel like collectors need that kind of layer of confidence that this is coming from somebody who sort of is really well steeped in the sort of presentation of exhibitions and selling of art? Because obviously these things still need sales to exist. I mean, we talk about them as alternative models, but they're still ultimately about selling art on some level.
I can answer from my point of view. I think it starts with us, because although we don't have a press department and a marketing department and an art fair department, the big galleries, we still have a structure. So there is some people within the gallery that can take care of the different projects, and so we can make these things happen. Whereas artists run spaces, usually they're artists by themselves, and it becomes a little more difficult. It's actually work. You need to sign leases and pay rents and make contracts. It's not very interesting work. I hire 2 people that take care of Artist City. There is a director and the assistant to the director. And they work full time to make these things happen.
Yeah, I think that artists, ultimately they're in their studio making work, and although you have artist-run spaces, the whole point of a gallery, I suppose, is to operate as a platform and a connector, and so we are perfectly positioned to act that way, whether it's in our own spaces or with these other projects, to enable artists more than, or facilitate them more than many times they're able to facilitate themselves, I think.
Right, and I think that sort of goes back to the whole idea of why the gallery exists in the first place. To a certain extent, most of the artists that I know would prefer to just be making work. Like, they don't want to think about the kind of entrepreneurial or operational aspects of putting on exhibitions, running shows, doing sales, and all those kinds of things. So as much as I think that we're now in a sort of climate where more and more people feel like it's incumbent on them as individuals to make things happen for themselves, it's still a really dicey proposition, I think, for a lot of artists unless they have a really kind of entrepreneurial mindset about these things. Like you're sort of throwing it to artists who I won't name names on, but we all know that there's a certain artist that really excels in a kind of fast-paced, sales-oriented, kind of winner-take-all kind of system. And I think that maybe you would disagree with me, I highly doubt it, but we don't want an art world that's just those artists or just the galleries who thrive by working with those artists. We need a kind of more diverse, more robust system. And I mean, I guess that's sort of why we're talking about these initiatives and why, in part, you have both started them.
Yeah, I feel that all those other systems do exist. It's just how can we tweak it so that they're all more sustainable?
And we've been talking about kind of large changes and very visible changes about whether it's gallery share projects or whether it's kind of year-long exhibitions in cities outside of the usual arts capitals. But do you think that there are any kind of smaller changes that galleries can make to kind of tip the scales more in their favor, if even just in the sense of maybe being more transparent about prices or things like that? Do you think that matters? Or do you think it is really that you just have to think big about these major projects and that's what's going to kind of...
I don't know what you mean by being transparent about prices. I mean, I usually quote my prices when you ask me because I try to sell you something. So how more transparent than that can you be?
Well, I mean, just as an example, I mean, I was walking around the fair today and I found, I think, maybe 3 galleries that actually just went ahead and put the prices of the works that they're showing in the booth on their actual wall labels. And maybe that's a really minor thing, but I mean, I think that it probably, in my eyes, it speaks to this sense that maybe there's a kind of hesitance to engage a broader public sometimes. And maybe that's working against art and art at kind of the sub-elite level, let's say, for lack of a better term, at least from a commercial standpoint.
Well, I think that our galleries used to put prices, but it was also a moment in which most people that walked into a gallery it was a very different time. But most people that walked into a gallery were interested in maybe buying art. So now, thank God, a lot of the audience in an art fair or in a gallery has no interest in buying art. They're just interested in art. So putting in, forefront the price seems not relevant. What do you think, Vanessa?
I think that it adds that thing that we said where, like, of course, we want to sell works, but we're trying to do something more than that, and it makes it all too much focused on the transaction, which may or may not happen. So I don't like having prices out either. But for me, I'm a younger gallery. My gallery is only 6 years old. When we talk about transparency, for me, it's much more relevant in terms of being transparent with artists about what the actual costs are of having a gallery, because I think that there is this pressure or this expectation that we all act as these like bigger galleries that are very visible can act and ship everything, store everything, produce everything, pay for the museum show, pay for the catalog. And the reality is that I simply cannot do that. And I like to be really transparent with my artists. Sometimes we'll do an art fair and I'll explain to them that maybe they made enough money to live for a year, but that I actually lost money at that fair. And I don't know if that's the right thing to do, but I think it's really important because we're in it together. Like, me and my artists are in it together, and they need to understand that in order for me to stay open and continue being able to provide that platform, like what the reality is of what the gallery can do, and not have this pressure to kind of keep up appearances and yeah.
Before opening my own gallery, I worked with Gagosian Gallery, and Larry's very generous, and he was in the habit with the most successful artists to give them lifts on his private plane, all over. So when I opened my gallery, obviously I could not, to tell my artists, this is a different world now, so it's going to be economy. But yes, I think that, it's fantastic that Larry could help Cy Twombly go from Virginia to Paris in a comfortable way. But frankly, anyone else can. The world doesn't have to go towards this, I don't know, money-led artists that feel that being an artist is a way to become a millionaire and becoming rich. You know, I don't know. I hope that artists, I think that most best of the good artists do not get into it to make money, but they get into it to make art, to make culture. So all the things around it, the expensive dinners, the planes, the big hotels versus the small hotels, they should really take a very secondary role in what we do.
Yeah, but for a gallery of my size, certainly there is no dinners, but also even production and storage and basic things like that are things that artists have to understand that, you know, in our case, and I'm sure in most galleries, we end up having, you know, 2 or 3 artists who are really financially supporting the gallery more than the others, and we're taking any profit that's made to support the careers of these other artists who are absolutely not financially sustainable for us, and I'm happy to do so, but then I have to draw the line, you know, and they have to understand, and I think especially with younger artists, there's just this thing that hasn't clicked sometimes because we tend to infantilize artists, I think, in the art world, and sometimes they just lack a really basic understanding of what the costs of a gallery are, just the basic costs of like shipping and fares and so on.
Well, I was reading about Richard Bellamy, and he said, kind of famously, that he didn't like for his artists to succeed too quickly because he was afraid that that would kind of hurt them in the long run. I mean, is that something that you sense is a very real danger?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why when people talk to me about the death of the medium-sized gallery, I think I really hope that it does not happen, because the medium-sized gallery needs to be there, because the artist needs to show in a small space, try out, you know, physical space has to be small, and try out certain things, and then eventually when they are more confident, maybe a little bit of a bigger space, and etc., and grow with it. And the growing, I'm talking about 30, 40 years. I'm not talking about 3 years, because that's what I was talking about. Mega gallery, fantastic. You know, for Richard Serra, Cy Twombly, all the great artists that can tackle that kind of things. Or, you know, Richard Prince, Jeff Koons, absolutely. I could not do a Jeff Koons show. I mean, it would be ridiculous. And
Couldn't.
So, but for anyone that is not that type of artist, that doesn't have that type of experience, it's good for them to go through all the steps and slowly. You know, the prices have to go up slowly. The foundation need to be built alongside the career. The foundations are museums, are good collections, are experiences, are dialogues between the different artists, are group shows in biennials. You know, everything needs to be there and add to what hopefully will become a really fantastic apotheosis in, you know, a fabulous space somewhere, you know, 500,000 square feet.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is correct, but what I observe in my generation of artists, and a lot of the galleries that are active and successful right now, they opened maybe 20 years ago, and then they're suddenly turning to a younger generation at this attempt to kind of stay connected. And I don't know if this was always the case with galleries. I know that often galleries start with artists of their own generation, kind of grow, and recently I've seen a lot of this kind of like, what can sometimes seem like random, like pluckings of like 2 generations below or something. And I think that's actually really problematic for the artists and the development of the practice itself, not just how they can handle the space, but also what restrictions get imposed on their freedoms and their decisions and their ability to not do a show for a year if they don't want to, or to do a show, and And I think it's interesting because no artist thinks that they're going to be the one who's going to end up in that position, despite there being a history of artists who end up in exactly that position. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think that that's something that tends to get overlooked, is that when we talk about galleries kind of feeling the compulsion that they need to expand, they need to get to a bigger space, they need to have multiple spaces, it also does put pressure on their artists too, and maybe their artists aren't ready. I mean, it's a big thing to go from trying to fill a 5,000 square foot space to a 50,000 square foot space. Not everybody can do it. And putting that demand on someone before they're ready for it can be just as problematic from an artistic standpoint as it can be from kind of an exhibitions and sales standpoint, I would think.
Yeah, also, if you want to really simplify the landscape a little bit, that's how I see it. There are some very successful, very good mega galleries, and then there is quite a few mega galleries wannabes. So they have all the different departments and the big stuff, and they do all the fairs and, you know, like the mega galleries, but they don't have the star artists. So they transform their artists into these machines that can feed all the art fair booths and can produce, so that they have more and more things that they can sell, even if the prices are not as high as the, you know, Richard Serra or Jeff Koons. So it's, yeah, there is a lot of pressure on production, and it's important for an artist to realize that the limitations of what what pressure one should take and what pressure one should not accept.
Yeah, I mean, I guess knowing your own limits is kind of a good rule of thumb for everyone involved in this process. It's not just about one party or another. Like, everyone kind of has to work together, I would think, to kind of really figure out solutions to these types of problems. Is there anything, kind of broadly speaking, let me ask it this way. So, do you feel like there are any general rules that either of you can impart on our audience about kind of how mid-level gallerists or smaller gallerists can attack these kinds of challenges? Or do you feel like it's really more of a boutique solution?
I personally always think about playing to your strengths. You know, my strength isn't being able to offer you 5 spaces around the world and endless production money, and it's just not what I do. And really, it's conversation, it's relationship, it's, you know, and then I just have to be upfront about that with the artists. And my only rule, as it were, is to know what it is that I can offer and know what it is that I am versus what this other gallery is and can offer, and versus what this huge blue chip gallery is and can offer, and just trying to keep hold of what's unique and important about that, and not try to be something that we're not.
Stefania, you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, I feel like that's what we've been talking about until now. How we exist as mega galleries. I mean, medium-sized galleries versus mega galleries.
Right. Yeah, it's not necessarily a combative thing. It's more just about figuring out ways to be creative, to work together, to kind of find a way to figure out answers to all these problems that are not going to go away.
Yeah, and there's certainly pragmatic things that I think could be revisited. Like, one thing which is very controversial whenever anyone brings it up, but I actually think we should think about it properly, is contracts, for example, because I know so many artists who have not been paid, and I know so many galleries who got screwed over, and, you know, there's simple systems in place that would protect everyone, and it wouldn't mean that an artist can't leave a gallery and go to a bigger gallery. It would just mean that maybe for the first year there is a percentage which rewards that first gallery for the investment they've put in that far, or, you know, just very, very simple procedures that are in place in other creative industries, or even in the case of like music, and how those investments are reflected. I think that would be really important for for sustainability. And I think that the only people who benefit from the lack of contracts are the top of the kind of corporate pyramid, as it were. And those are very practical steps, which are linked to this idea of transparency we were talking about before. And of course, it would take a big overhaul, but I don't think it should be such a taboo subject, because it's not saying that this amazing relationship you end up having with your artist is something that can be, made into this bureaucratic process. All it's saying is that you're taking a very pragmatic approach towards very palpable issues that do come up.
I actually totally disagree. I hate the idea of contracts. Well, first of all, living in America, tell you, there's enough lawyers already as it is. That's enough. I don't think we need any more. We don't need a battery of art lawyers. But the moment you talk about a contract, you have the fine line. We need to have a lawyer. The artist needs to have a lawyer. That's exactly what I do not want my gallery to become, a corporation that does contracts.
I guess I was thinking of agreements. I wasn't even thinking of lawyers, but it's clear agreements that are I guess the next step would be to have a lawyer, but in the UK we're just I don't even have a lawyer, but a clear agreement.
Right, okay, so it's a handshake agreement.
But maybe a little bit more formalized, something that is written down, and that maybe when you sign it, it's not that it's enforceable by law necessarily, but I don't know, or maybe it is, I don't know.
If you want something that is enforceable, it needs to have a lawyer involved and everything else that comes with it. I hope that I will never have to do that, truly. Maybe, this is why I will never be a gallery that is a sort of a corporation, because I do not want to talk to anyone else but my artists, my clients, my collectors, my friends, and and exist in that realm. I would really prefer not to have to talk to too many business managers and marketing people and PR people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with that statement, but at the same time, being a very young gallery who works with a couple of very big galleries also has its difficulties that I think could be safeguarded in some way.
Yeah. Well, I think that this speaks to what we were talking about before, where each gallery needs to figure out what works for them and build off of that. And with that, as much as I would love to keep going, I'm being told that we have to switch into Q&A mode here. So if there's anybody in the audience who has any questions for any of our panelists. Anybody? Yes.
I enjoyed the talk very much, but as a gallerist, a young gallerist to mid-gallerist, and talking about transparency, it's very often the artists who don't want the prices to be known, because they're a community, and some artists do well, then others slow down, then they do well and others slow down, and they don't really want each other to know if they're doing well when others are not. And I have found that during a gallery exhibition, they would never want their prices put out front. They wouldn't want it to be shown in that way.
They want to be seen for what they're doing, their art, not what the prices are. Also, the prices are so volatile, the prices go up and then come down, and it's all okay. It doesn't really change the inherent value of the art. It's just whatever amount of money that people are excited to pay for those works. It doesn't change it. So I understand the artists.
Yeah, and I'm also not sure what having the prices on the wall would do in terms of the things we're discussing, like what problems it might solve. When I think of transparency, I think much more of, like I was saying, costs and distribution.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
Did you mention art cities? Did you mention art cities? The Basel art cities
a new project that is starting in Buenos Aires, Argentina?
I noticed it. I started in Buenos Aires. I did not go, so I'm not 100% sure what it is. But they're absolutely not related.
Okay.
No, so no. I mentioned what I do is called Artist City, which is very close to art cities, but
okay.
it's
Okay, but
different.
You did mention, though, this trend of spectacularization. So isn't that a trend that some cities are after? So as to position their cities as a mark, as a sort of level.
What's the question?
There is a trend of making spectacular shows, as you commented. Some cities, whether well-known cities or unknown, are also following that trend. That is why I ask you about the Buenos Aires issue.
The way that I've understood Basel Art Cities, I haven't been myself, but I thought it sounded like a really interesting initiative because it's finding cities that have an art scene that maybe for other parts of the world seems maybe a little bit impenetrable or like opaque, and to organize something that's a structured trip where like you can join and go and learn about these different places and visit them and be introduced to people. Sounds like a really nice initiative because it's about also bringing the focus back to the galleries and the institutions in that city, which I think is what the good art fairs do, and is it what maybe some of the auction houses like take away, is this this is when we talk about this culture of gallery going, which is also something that seems to be a little bit on the decline, and which is something that I try to address with Kondo. I think that you have a few really strong art fairs that will always be really important for all of us in every way, but then you have a lot of this kind of endless proliferation of very mediocre art fairs that spring up on the back of that, and that's something that I feel is pulling away from this culture of just going into an exhibition space, having a conversation with the person who put that show together. And I think Artist City or Condo or even Art Basel cities are different ways of addressing this. So I think I haven't been, but I think it sounds exciting, and I would love to visit a part of the world that I don't know in this kind of like structured way put together by, you know, the filter of Art Basel.
Okay, I've been given the signal that we're going to close it there. So thank you very much for attending and for your questions, and thanks again to our panelists and to Art Basel, and have a great rest of the weekend.